have to. You just want to randomize, yeah. You just want to confuse the audience. Yeah, that's okay too. That's perfectly fine. What was really interesting for me, by the way, in both your presentations is, one is increase in awareness about AI and privacy. But two is also, it freaked me out just a little bit. And I want to share some examples with the audience because it humanizes it. You know, in context of, I was jotting down notes, but in context of explainability, what Prof. Mohan was talking about, I had been speaking to the IBM Watson healthcare folks, and literally Watson can provide a suggestion on medications that should be taken based on your age, your weight, your, people, 100,000 people who've had exactly the same condition that you presented yourself for, except what it does not do is look at contraindications for other things that you might have. So for example, if I might be exactly 82 years old and I might have blood pressure and I might have been a cancer patient and I might have diabetes, but maybe I have a skin condition which other 82-year-olds don't have. It literally did end up in killing one person. So again, be aware. The second one is in terms of bias, right? This is something I'm personally very passionate about. I'm passionate about women in STEM. I'm a computer engineer by trade, and then I did my finance, which is a very lonely world for women. Women CEOs, again, executive recruitment firms will tell you this, that when they run AI to come up with the right sort of people that they should target to become CEOs of companies, women don't come up simply because if you use historics to predict the future, historically women were not CEOs. So again, we've got a problem, right? Inherent bias in the algorithm. And then location-based services. I was joking with Prof. Mohan. My husband has this habit of checking in to Facebook every time we travel, right? Go to Changi Airport, checked in. Taking a flight to Rome, checked in. And I keep telling him, the thieves are responding saying, Dr. Sridhar, checked in to your home right now, cleaned it out, thank you very much. So that's scary. It's very, very scary. So it is all real, and hence I think it's a very, very interesting topic. By the way, you can see that I've got 2 pages of questions prepared for all our panelists here. But I want to be aware that this event is for you, the audience. It's not for me because I have access to them. We are going to hold them captive on your behalf. So ask away, interrupt me if necessary. And this doesn't have to be run in the schedule, yeah? So feel free to raise your hands. If you're feeling shy, Jin, do we have Slido? Jin? We do have Slido? Yeah, okay. If you're feeling shy, you can type up your questions on Slido, but it's such a small audience. I really think raising your hands would be much easier. It'll make it more personal as well. So Dr. Bora, we haven't heard from you, so I'm going to start with you. You're the head of data science at AXA Singapore. So from the insurance industry, data is something that we need to identify gaps in insurance coverage, right? Speed up your claims, reduce your fraud. How do you sort of think your role as a data custodian of the data you hold versus sort of driving customer trust versus the insurance industry is? How do you think about that? You hold a ton of data about individuals.
Yeah, okay.
Is the microphone on?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Maybe for the insurance company, you might think that we hold a lot of data, but actually most of them are declarative data. We don't take the trace. We don't track you, at least not for now. So mainly the data
not for now, folks. Listen to that part.
So mainly the data that I and my team are working as a data scientist are mostly declarative data. So still, it's very important data, and we protect it in AXA. No, not everybody have access to it. So, and for sure, we have also sensitive data, like the claims, as you said, health claims. And these data, which are declarative, the context of how we use it is very strict. We cannot do whatever we want. We work in a very regulated industry. So all of this thing is very well, I will say, defined already as for us as a data science team. So the data that we have, I will say that for the example that you have given, we were not there yet where we, even if there is telematics or things like this, we are not at the level where we are able to have all your trace and derive some behavior trends or things like this. So I will say that in the industry and maybe in the bank, we are a bit not that mature compared to the given example that you have provide for like Google or things like this.
Mm-hmm. But it's coming, right?
As a data scientist, yes, we hope that it will come one day. But yeah, but yeah, you can see the industry as like a old industry. We have some. We need to get a bit faster on certain questions, and the data is something that for sure is important for us, but we like the process. We don't have the automated process and things like this that basically all the pure players have. So yeah, this is the part where in terms of data, we are, as a data scientist working in an insurance company, my first reflex is to say and to ask myself, do I trust this data?
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Yes.
When it comes to the data, you say it's declarative data that you're collecting.
The clarity?
You said it's declarative information?
Declarative, yes.
So this is information, you ask a question, somebody gives an answer.
All customer declare, so they feel it.
Okay, so once AXA gets hold of the information, who owns it?
Sorry?
Do you own the information? Do you own the data?
Do I own the data? Does AXA own the data?
And if you do, what happens with the data sets? Do you share them with other companies?
No, this is the things that we cannot do, at least as a data scientist. And for sure, the data, we own the data, but we don't share it. This is something, at least at AXA Singapore. I'm talking only for AXA Singapore because I'm working for AXA Singapore, but we don't share the data. This is something like, as AXA Singapore, we have never sold the data to other companies. This is not part of the strategy, and at least what I can say is that for my department, this is not the part of. We analyze only the data that provide from our core system, and the data is basically collected by our agent or different distribution channel when the customer comes to us and declare the data.
So let me just validate. I appreciate your question, and thank you for that. But just in context of the individuals on the stage, I think the focus was AI data privacy risk management. They're not necessarily, he's not necessarily representing an AXA very specific point of view. I think he's here as a data scientist who's an expert in AI and data privacy. So if you do have company-specific questions, possibly I'll request you to ask them off stage, which they will be. And that.
My question wasn't directed at AXA.
Okay.
If people are collecting personal data,
Got it. That's at a general level, right? Yeah. So I think if Prof. Mohan, do you have a thought on that? If people are collecting data, and who would actually be the ownership? Where would the ownership, provided it's declared data, which the customer is aware of and is signing a declaration?
Yeah, I think depend what's there on the form, Britt, and I think by default it is assumed that whoever is collecting the data is the owner of the data. However, I think with the regulatory agencies are putting restrictions on what type of data you can collect, and you have to declare the purpose of why you are collecting the data, and you are not supposed to use the data for any other purpose other than stated there. However, there can always be problems, right?
Yeah.
A classic example is, how many of you have heard of 23andMe? That is this American company Basically, you go to a drugstore in the US, like CVS and all, pay $150. They basically give you a test tube and an envelope. You take the test tube, spit into it, put it into the envelope, and mail it. And a few days later, you get back your genetic information, your ancestry, and which of the diseases you are prone to, and all sorts of things. So for this kit, I mean, that seems like a good thing. And they say, we are going to aggregate the data and keep periodically giving you more information. However, 2 years ago, they got into a big controversy because after collecting the spit of so many people, millions of people, what they decided to do is sell this data to GlaxoSmithKline. And people were very upset that I was interested in knowing only my ancestry and my disease history. And you are now selling it to a pharma company. But they said, oh, remember how many of you have signed those long agreement forms, right? You signed off there that there was a tiny, in maybe font size 0.1, that I agree that 23andMe can sell the data to anybody. So actually people had signed it off legally. But is that ethical? I don't know. Is it legal? Technically, I think it is legal. But I would say it is.
I mean, it raises a really good question because I sign a ton of, these are my terms and conditions. Even when you download an app, do you click accept? I definitely don't read 23 pages of legal jargon which says, barring this and knowing that and in this jurisdiction, blah, blah, blah. I just click accept. So I don't know the answer to that as to what am I signing off on. So it's a very fair point and something to worry about as well. Yeah. And over the weekend, I think I've got a ton of emails which says because of the, the PDPA coming into force, you can't use your N-CRiPT anymore. Can you please update this? Can you update that? Can you not? Even your basic Watson's membership card, you need to update it. So it is quite worrying. So going to you, I mean, I think this is an interesting question because this is something that I already had written down, Dr. Mohan, Prof. Mohan, is, so are you, as somebody who's researching this space and actively working on AI, how do you think we, as customers, should think through sharing of information versus the benefits we certainly want from it? So I might want certain recommendations, but I want these recommendations when I ask for them, not when the AI decides to provide it for me. So there's sort of like a fine tune between that privacy paradox. How do you respond to that?
It's a very difficult question. I think if I had a real quick answer, I think I would have done a startup up there.
You're welcome anytime.
Yeah. I think it's a very, very difficult question, and this is something I think we as a human society, I think we need to come to some equilibrium. I think just very simple example like Gmail. I think we all like free email service. It's very convenient. It is very scalable. They give a lot of storage space, but then their AI algorithms are reading all of your emails. Therefore, you kind of send an email to a friend, and suddenly, coincidentally, in some other Google product, you see an ad, which is related to the email you sent. It's not a coincidence. They are actually, the big brother is watching you out there. So the question really is that, you are kind of signing off some of your privacy for getting that free service. Are we willing to pay for all the services? And so I think this is something we have to ask. If a company comes in town which says, I give you paid email with no advertisement or no snooping into your emails, and there is a true cost to that, are you willing to pay? And I think from corporations, I think many people are willing to pay. Individuals perhaps are less willing to pay. And this is something I think it is for individuals to decide. On the other hand, there is also a flip question that, and related to your question about who owns the data, really, Google knows a lot about me. That's legitimately my data, right? And they're providing me free service. However, they are also using that data to push ads onto me. And as a result, they are making an annual profit of, what, $60 billion, $70 billion a year? So actually, is that a fair compensation for me, those free services provided? Should they give me free email plus $30 a month? They should send a check to me based on the profits they make. I don't know. And I think as a society, we have to start questioning if they're making inordinate amount of profits of our data. Of course, a single Mohan's data is useless. It's because all of us subscribe to Gmail. I think they extract value from there. So collectively, as a society, I think we have to question, is this the right model for us? And I don't think there is an easy
From the business school point of view, I think $30 per person sounds good.
So they know they are from computer science, you know. So anyhow, so it depends on use case, of course. So for instance, let's say insurance company could put device in my car. I don't have a car, you know, but if I had, you know, and then they could track, you know, how well I drive, and based on that they could, you know, price the insurance. Most people probably would opt out because this goes to insurance company immediately, and you don't know before the test that actually will this increase or decrease your price. So what is a more sustainable business model because of this risk of customers is like, you know, that some of you are making this startup and actually doing that, you know, putting that device and checking how well you drive, and then you disclose to customer and saying like, you know, that with this data, most likely your insurance price will go up or down, and you will say how much. And then you can decide, do I disclose this to insurance company or not? So this kind of additional layer. But to be honest, at the equilibrium, what will happen, that good drivers will disclose their data, and then bad drivers not. So these guys are smart enough to really actually know that, you know, they are fine with this business model. But typically, you, me, we are not that smart understanding what will happen at the equilibrium. Anyway, so my point is that it depends on the use case. So for instance, on the, you know, Mohan said this 23andMe, so there are network effects as well. When you disclose your data, you are not only disclosing your data, you disclose all your family data at the same time, and you never ask them. Can you see, if I have your genetic data, I can forecast your family members and extended family and blah, 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 you know, what are their risks, you know, getting different diseases. You never ask them. And this is I think it's a problem. And same applies to, at the at the smaller level, it's like, you know, we are using WhatsApp, for instance. You know, there you can give your contacts. You never ask me. You gave Facebook my phone number. And they can monetize that, because many times when you merge these different data sets, what is the identifier? It's the phone number. So they can merge, and that increases a lot of, you know, the data they have about me. I never done that, by the way, because of this reason. In WhatsApp, I never gave my contacts, and I have massive problems using WhatsApp because, you know, I have just phone numbers, not names, you know, there, because they don't have my contacts. But I have a problem, you know, that I disclose Facebook something about you, and that's the reason I never done that. It's just me. I'm extreme, you know, so don't do. So then the last one, very good question, you know, on these, who owns the data? So I believe that the future is more like, you know, what we have, you know, regulation in Europe. So actually, you have always option to manage your data. You can ask companies, for instance, a simple question, delete my data. And then they already comply. They have to delete the data if you request that. You know, European company, they have the same processes here, and then if you ask, you know, that will happen. I think, this is definitely where we are heading, in my mind.
But I have a comment on that. I think deleting the data, they can comply, but they may not even comply, because they had that data about your driving, my driving behavior, and they built a model out there. And then I said, delete my data. They deleted my data, but they've not updated the machine learning model. So implicitly, they have my data inside their model, right? So it's a bit tricky. It's not as easy as it sounds.
If I can flip that same question to you, Prof. Yussi, from a perspective of corporate governance in startups, or you've consulted for financial institutions, corporates, governments, you know, how would you think, what are their challenges in context of sort of AI and data privacy? Because what we've talked about till now is more from a customer, consumer standpoint, but more from a corporate standpoint.
Yeah, unfortunately, startups they don't have these problems typically because they don't have data. You know, so,
so that's yet another question.
So I
what do we
wish
do about
they had this problem. You know, so but it's important to have proper processes. Proper processes on these things. You know, that once you get the data, you really understand that this is the biggest assets you have, and if you don't handle the data well, you might be dead, tomorrow, because someone finds out, that, you are not, complying many things. They don't trust you, because many times if someone is giving companies or people give you data, that means they trust you. So you have to have two things to be successful. I mean, many other things as well. Someone has to trust you, for instance, giving you funding or data or whatever, and then you have to be right. Okay, so you have to have proper models. So these two things have to happen. If you fail in one of these, it's just dream this firm. So don't lose that trust. One mistake, it's really difficult to build again the trust. It takes forever to build the trust, but you can lose that in a second.
Unless you are Facebook.
Ah.
So I might ask Dr. Bora this. What are some ways sort of we can think through that AI can help us with faster decision making based on interpreting data, but is that really going to lead to good outcomes for everybody? Do we really need this level of interpretation to provide the outcomes that the customers are asking for?
Okay, so I don't think personally that you need to use AI everywhere. As a data scientist, I'm more, okay, my range of tools that I can use can be just simply statistics to more advanced stuff, but usually there's a principle where if we can use simple things, then we'll try to use simple things to answer business questions. So actually, when we talk about neural networks or things like this, it's pretty rare to use it in a production environment today in an insurance company. So we are not, again, there yet. We use machine learning in production environment for propensity scores and things like this. This is the kind of thing that we do. But for all the process that we try to put in place in the company, we don't try to put AI everywhere. That's not the point, and sometimes it can harm our process. So this is something that we try to be very careful with. So yeah, I will say that AI is not the solution for everything, and actually AI and data science are a bit two different things. So data science is not only concentrated in AI, we can use more simpler stuff. And AI is only a tool, and we have many tools. Sometimes just a simple data visualization has more impact than a neural network. So this is the type of thing that we, as a data science manager, try to teach the younger data scientists that, okay, I know that AI is fancy, deep learning is fancy, but actually for the kind of thing, the kind of problem that we are supposed to solve, sometimes you don't need deep learning, and I don't see why you should use deep learning where we have problems in terms of explainability, where simple logistic regression will go faster in terms of solving the problem, explainability, compliance, and even sometimes it gives better results than deep learning. So this is, as a data scientist, this is the kind of thing that we do. So AI for a data scientist doesn't really mean something, too many notions are included in AI, and we stay to statistic, machine learning, deep learning. This is the type of things that we know we can define. AI is mostly for us, it's in PowerPoint. It's not in production.
Right. And this sort of brings us to an interesting point, right? While we're doing modeling, I mean, and this question is open to all the panelists, but what are sort of the risks of AI? We talked about some of them, like bias and data privacy, but how do we mitigate these risks? What can we do as corporates? Because while the world is spinning around faster and faster every day, and consumers are demanding more and more, we keep pushing these boundaries of what we can deliver as services. And to do that, we do need the support of machines. So how do we actually, what are the risks, and how do we mitigate these risks?
For the AI risk, I will say that, so if I take the definition of the presentation given just previously, in terms of you have robustness, explainability, fairness. I will give one example for me that talks to me. It's the fairness, the risk of fairness, so mostly linked to the bias. Actually, it's not a new thing. I mean, if you have ever worked as a statistician, if you have been doing survey or things like this, then the bias, the selection bias, is something that is known from a very old time. Many surveys have been wrong because, especially for some elections or things like this, and it's kind of case to this for the statisticians. So something that is very important for me as a manager is to remind the younger one that fairness in terms of data is something really important. So the first rule I would say is don't trust the data that you have. So you have to be very careful about this. And one of the AI risks that is one of the first one, which is fairness, for me is something that is very old and is linked to the selection bias. But nothing new from today. Still, it's something that people tend to forget. They trust the data. They think that data is clean, data is reliable. Actually, data is never reliable, so far as I've seen. So you always have to clean it, you always have to modify it, and double check if it makes sense, your result makes sense. This is so this a way to a solution against this fairness is also to double check your results as a human being. Do they make sense? Is it reasonable? This is the kind of thing that can prevent very bad consequences.
Anything to add, Prof. Mohan or you, Prof. Yussi?
No, this also depends on use cases. So, I mean, what are you really, like, for instance, when we are doing modeling, we do model validation, what are the risks there? We should always record, what data sets we used in model validation, etc. We can go back, we understand, these things. So it's really depends on the use case and organization. But organizations should really sit down and start thinking, listing these things. It's different in insurance, it's different in healthcare, it's different at, higher education, but we really have to, sit down and think about what are these different, AI risks, So, for instance, if we are using, models to predict, to whom we should sell insurance, to sales guys to really use these models, then we have to go back what Mohan explained, that models have to be transparent. They have to understand that. They have to make sense. So we have to have not only fancy again, machine learning GUI, etc. No, we have to have proper visualization of the models. People have to understand those, and they have to trust those. But really, these AI risks, it depends on industry, and then you have to go inside the industry, different units what they are doing and really go to details. What doesn't.
But that doesn't sound like it'll really solve the problem, though, because when Prof. Mohan was presenting, he was saying that machine learning doesn't truly anonymize your data, right? You can, there is a traceability factor. So even if I actually had a really good system for explainable AI, and I could explain the weightages and hence how the deep neural networks came up with a particular outcome, isn't that making it worse for me as a consumer because I'm even more identifiable now than I was before?
Yeah, okay, so I differ again. It depends on what is the risk you are worried about. I was worried about that my sales guys are not using my models.
Yeah.
So in order to my sales guys to use my models, I have to explain, they have to really understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Don't use this as a black box. That was now you are saying, again, it's a different, risk, you are saying that the customers, okay, so then we have to start thinking of that again, anonymizing, it's not necessarily, solving the problem, if you are, worried about privacy. It's a different risk, and that's exactly what I mean. We really, sorry guys, there is no shortcut. We have to make a list, and, think about these different risks, separately, and how do we manage that.
Fair.
Jussi, I think, brilliantly explained that, and I completely agree with him. I just want to illustrate his point very specifically. I think we have to understand these risks and be conscious of them and evaluate our models for that. And also, some of these risks are intention. If you make it more transparent and explainable, maybe some of the other things, the privacy risk will increase. And then, in my opinion, there is no solution which will completely eliminate all the risk. As I said, therefore, that's why we want to actually emphasize the risk management. You have to manage the risk. And I think we all have to be aware that when we share data, there is some risk involved. And just to kind of give you an example of what could be, and this is a completely cooked up hypothetical example, but it's kind of, I'm cooking it up on some real fact. And we discussed this before this event. So about 2 years ago, Uber came under a lot of flack, not because of the sexual harassment, but there was a rumor that their search pricing was not based on demand and supply of drivers and passengers, but on the battery level of your phone. Which means that if your battery level is going down, then the search pricing goes up because you will be desperate to actually accept and at a higher price. And of course, they completely denied that. But what they did not deny is the fact that they actually monitor your battery level. And why the hell should Uber know your battery level? It is completely irrelevant to the business. So the point is, the risk could be that when you do these machine learning models, part of the problem is the data has many, many hundreds and thousands of dimensions. So for example, you train a machine learning model, you are Uber, you're coming up with a good search pricing model, and then you find one of the parameters out there is the battery level, and then you find that customers are willing to accept rides when the battery level goes to 2% or 5% and this thing, then you'll suggest more of that. And therefore, I think you as a company have to consciously say, why am I collecting this data? And I think as consumers, I think we have to demand, why do you need this data? And secondly, even if you're collecting for whatever purpose, right? When you build your model, we have to try to understand the model. What is it actually modeling? And let's assume that the search price, the strongest strength is linked to your battery level. I think there's something seriously wrong. Therefore, I think the domain knowledge, I think, which you alluded to, understanding the business, what is it that we are serving? Why are we doing this? I think the domain knowledge of that particular business is very critical to avoid some of the risks related to AI.
Thank you. That was a very helpful explanation from both of you. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll get to Slido. So I hope you folks are posting. Are there some questions at the moment? Can you hang on for 1 second? I have one question, and then I will get to you. This is absolutely, I promise, the last one from my end. Because I have to ask this on behalf of the startup community here, because SGInnovate, we sort of support researchers, we support some of the brilliant scientific minds, we want them to become entrepreneurs, whether it's fintech or medtech. And one thing that they classically struggle with, which Prof. Jussi identified for us before, is data, right? So how can our researchers sort of be less dependent on that need for data? Is that even possible to consider maybe quality over quantity and have less of that? Is that something that you see happening? Is that even possible?
Do you need data to have to succeed?
Quality over quantity from a startup perspective.
I'm not sure that you have to worry a bit too much about data when you're starting a company. After this, I've never created my startup yet, but I'm thinking about Airbnb, and they explain in their presentation that they show you their growth over years, and things are starting to explode at one point. And the presenter is asking, do you know what is this? Why is it exploding? This growth is exploding at this moment. And actually, it's not because of data. It's because they have taken a decision of taking professional pictures on their website instead of amateur pictures.
I guess I'm coming at it more from if I'm building a solution, a machine learning solution or an AI solution for us to meet a particular demand or need in a particular industry, I do need to train my algorithm, and I need data sets to be able to do that. But data sets are notoriously hard to find and harder in healthcare, medtech. So how do we go about, what can we do to help the startup community either gain access to that, or is it the quality, or is it just something we have to live with?
That's a difficult question because for me...
Prof. Mohan has it.
Okay, so I now speak as a computer science researcher. I think what you ask is a very interesting and a very difficult question. However, I think in the machine learning research community, I think there is two efforts. One is to how to learn with less data. And that's a real problem which a lot of people are looking at. And in fact, the ideal, what we would like is, just if you see one example, and then can you learn? Of course, it's a bit far-fetched, but there is existence proof it can be done. For example, human beings, babies, if they see one cat or two cats, they pretty much can understand the concept of a cat much better than any machine learning algorithm today. So the neural network out here somehow can do it much better than any of our current machine learning algorithms. So this is definitely what the entire, the machine learning community is one of the research strengths. Meanwhile, there is also a parallel trend which is known as transfer learning. And let me give you an example. In our own research in our group, and Dr. Yongkang Wang out there can attest to that, is it is much easier to get data about images than to get data about videos. So let's assume you are building a machine learning model about videos. Then can we kind of train the model on images, lots of images, but much fewer videos? Because images and videos are somewhat related, right? I mean, a video is just a sequence of images with a temporal direction. And many of the things, so what is missing from images is the motion. And therefore, you can learn the objects and the concepts from images, but for motion, you give very few videos explaining the motion, and then can you piece together, can the machine learning algorithm piece together this information and do that? And actually, there's a very formal way of doing what is known as transfer learning. And in many of the problems, transfer learning is useful. In our own group, I think we have used that for many of the things. So the efforts are underway to do transfer learning, and of course, learning with fewer data. There is, of course, the other thing which Jussi Keppo mentioned, which is reinforcement learning, where you basically give a reward punishment. As you build along more data, the model becomes better and better with time. So there are multiple approaches. But is there a perfect approach? I don't think so. And it has to be really based on a particular problem and do that.
So let me just add, I'm saying obvious things, So the order of things is the following. Of course, in your startup, most important thing is that you are really solving a business problem. Your use case is by far the most important, what problem you are solving. Then second most important thing is the data, least is the models. Because nowadays you have a lot of libraries, etc. You are not competing on the models. You compete first business, problem, then second, access to data, and third one, the least, important thing is like, all these machine learning, AI, Because, if you don't know those things, just email me. We are supplying fantastic students that are doing the last step. That's not your problem. The first problem is business problem you're going to solve. Second, the data, and then the third is the models. And on the data, what is, I think, is massively overvalued is big data. Everyone is saying big data, this and that. Many times big data means, low quality data. So what is undervalued is small, high quality data that you can trust. And I'm saying even, and of course, we teach, these different machine learning models. What is many times what is solving your problem is very simple linear regression, if you really are solving relevant problem. So don't think about this coolly that, you have to do fancy this and that model. No, you have to solve a, relevant business problem. That's the first most important. And don't, underestimate small, high quality data. I mean, high quality, I mean that you can really trust the data points. That many times solves a lot of problems. Okay.
No, thank you. Very practical advice. Appreciate that. Sorry to the young lady in this second row. We'll go back to your questions and back to the audience questions.
Thank you for all the advice just now. I have two questions. One question is actually following what you mentioned just now about the small quantity data. Will you think like a large data set, but it's a very biased one, like up to, let's say like 3,000 of them, that is very biased, large data set as versus to like a few, like only 200 of small quantity data? Which one is more important?
Okay, so this is of course, it's a trade-off between quality and quantity of the data. So of course, if you ask, researchers like me, we always say, give me more data. It never ends, by the way. We always say more and more, right? So that's exactly. So anyway, so you can, this is a statistical question. You can actually look at, if you add, more data points, how much accuracy of your models is going up. So you can test that. So you can actually see, given your model, what is the value of additional data sets? And then at some point, accuracy is enough to solve that business problem. But it depends on the business problem. I cannot, say, but again, let me repeat. Typically, when you start doing this exercise, you realize that, if you have simple models, and many times simple models are robust, and we are after robustness. Linear regression is, guys, it's undervalued. I mean, no, it's not undervalued, because I know that, when we are doing marketing, we say like, AI. When we go to customers, everyone is saying we do AI, etc. When we are hiring, they are hiring our students. What do they say? They say we are doing machine learning, because machine learning is what we teach in the school. When they execute, they do linear regression. So you have, because they are after robustness. They want to have good model in many, many different environments. So once you have, let's say linear regression, for instance, so many times you understand that even small, high quality data is enough. So when you add additional data points to there, the accuracy is not going up significantly anymore. So you can test, this is a statistical question.
So the second question is, as regard how any one of you view the Singapore law, or in term the legal perspective, in terms of protecting the user while helping protecting the user privacy, but in the same time helping the startup AI company to go the Singapore's. Sorry, let me rephrase. How you view from a legal perspective in terms of maybe let's say in Singapore, in protecting the user privacy while balancing the need of like helping the startup AI company that need a lot of user data that the company in the future might harm or benefit the user a lot?
I don't know whether I can answer your question. I'll attempt to answer your question. I think, first of all, I think all the PDPC, the regulatory laws, I think have to be followed, whether you are a startup or not. So in the sense, when you get the data, you have to get the informed consent of whoever is providing the data. Also, you have to provide the purpose why it is to be used, and that has to be respected, right? So now, the question you are really asking is that data good enough for you?
Is the country legal, the law is doing enough in protecting the user privacy? But
you are asking whether PDPC is good enough in Singapore?
Yeah, and is it good enough, but also harming not helping the AI startup company?
I guess this is, it's basically kind of, you are really alluding to where is the right trade-off, right? I mean, we can look at two extremes, right? One extreme is, let's assume if Singapore law offers no privacy guarantees to any of the people out here, the citizens in Singapore, then you can do anything with the data, and you can probably give very amazing services, very customized, very creepy, very profitable. I think, yes, it is good from the business perspective, but I think it will turn off a lot of the citizens. And maybe it may actually harm some of the citizens. For example, if the insurance company can get access to my genetic data, get all my data, then they'll say, Mohan, I think it was nice knowing you, but we don't want you as a customer, because they know, based on my genetic predisposition, that I'm going to be a risky customer. Then maybe. So giving complete freedom, protecting no privacy, has its bad side. On the other hand, if you turn the knob completely the other side, you cannot collect any data. Then of course, I mean, as a private citizen, I think I'm very well protected. No company or no unwanted services will be pushed to me. But then I'll be denied a lot of the services which perhaps AXA can offer to me. So the question really is, what you're asking is, where should the knob be set, right? Obviously, either of the extremes is bad. And where do we set? And this is something I think is very hard to answer, because what the society can accept varies from society to society. There is a cultural factor. And not only that, these norms vary with time. The favorite story I'll tell you something. I grew up in India, okay? And my grandmother, if you came to my grandmother's house, any person would come. The first thing she would ask, how much do you earn? All right? And it was considered very okay to ask what is your salary? There was never the notion that is private data. But in India today, most probably a grandmother will not ask you what is your salary, because the norms have changed even in a country like India. So this is not something which is fixed with time. I think this is something, there is always tension. The boundaries are being pushed. And I guess, in a way, the law, the legislation, and all reflects the norms of the society. So it's very hard to answer, is this the right setting of the norm? I don't know. Maybe it's a very unsatisfactory answer, but I'm trying to adapt.
So let me add, one point. There is one additional trade-off. So this regulation, actually, what it does. I mean, we will get more definitely on data privacy regulation. What it does, in top of things, protecting consumers, it's an entry cost, meaning that it's more expensive for startups to start complying. They have to put processes, all these legal processes in place. It's a fixed cost. Then it's harder to compete, with the existing large firms. For them, complying this regulation is peanuts. But for startups to really comply, all these things, it's a significant cost. They are small startups. You can see this already in a banking business, in finance. So if you look at where we have fintech, mostly we have fintech on things that are in finance, which is less regulated. You don't see, I mean, for instance, my daughters, they are 13 and 16. Their startup will not be a bank. I'm sorry, it's not going, because immediately when you take deposits, you have to comply so many things that it's impossible to do for startups. So it's an entry cost, and it means that if you look at the banks, I'm not surprised 20 years from now you have exactly the same players, because it's really difficult to compete with these, because you cannot enter the market. Entry cost because of the regulation. Of course, all banks are saying that this regulation is horrible, it's costly for us. I'm sure they love that, because that minimizes the competition. Same will apply to Facebook, Google. I'm sure that they already, because now they comply these European laws, I'm pretty sure they love this, because it's more difficult to me to start competing with them.
Any other? There's a question here, and then we'll go back to that gentleman. Now, there's a question right here. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. I work in HR, so I loved your examples. We have been trying to train people to overcome their bias in the workplace for decades. And obviously there is a concern with the data that we've got now being used for models in deep neural net and the outcomes upon which other bad decisions will be taken. I'm curious, and I'm sorry, I don't have the background, so I don't know algorithmically. Can we not train or write it to say, don't be biased? Does it actually have to be the data that is unbiased to produce the outcome? Am I making sense?
Yeah, you are making sense. So we can, for instance, thanks for the question. So we can discuss afterwards more on details. But you can train these models without certain covariates. So for instance, you can not use female, you don't use ethnicity groups, and you don't use age, and etc. And this is, you have to do in many countries already. In Europe, you cannot use for instance gender. In California they cannot discriminate. I mean, if you are over 40, guess what? That's already that you cannot discriminate by law people over 40. So you cannot use this kind of information. So you have to train your models without those. Not only that you remove those variables, but you have to make sure that that you cannot use autocovariates to explain those. Let me explain. For instance, in US, in loan applications, I mean, in many businesses, you cannot use race, as a covariate. Unfortunately, zip code in US is, in some cities, it's correlated like 99 point whatever with the race. So then, so then the question is like, that are you really? I mean, if you just give the data to data scientists because they are just drinking this machine learning coolie, they think that they are okay doing that. And of course, it's not okay if you disclose really what your models are doing. And this is something that we work with firms to really, make sure that, that this model is not necessarily, I mean, it's already like, complying the laws, but I think you should have higher standards than that, because if your customers will learn what you do, so then, or your employees even more, so then they should learn these things. So how to do this properly, we do these kind of things.
That's good to know, because I think at the moment with AI being slapped on everything, that the HR tech that's being sold, that there's not enough questions from HR people about what's happening in the black box. Just sorry, a really ignorant, but I'm curious. You said you can tell by going backwards in the is there not something you can write that sort of sends them off on a wild goose chase? Is there nothing you can do in between that says you cannot, if you go back, you cannot come to a person that sends you off somewhere else? Is there not something you can write?
Yeah. So you're basically talking about inferring on who it was trained. Actually, there are the current deep learning models and machine. Unfortunately, they suffer from this flaw. But people are trying to overcome them, and there are multiple ways, and basically some kind of a randomization have to be used. But there is also another emerging technique which again is being researched in our center, which is called data synthesis. Data synthesis is a new technique because, okay, let me backtrack. What you said earlier, what he said earlier, anonymization doesn't work. And the simple reason, I can give you a very simple intuitive explanation for that. So you think if there is the data, the HR data about a person, and you say, oh, we are going to be race blind, so we'll just remove the column of the race, right? Now, if it is a sufficiently large dimensional data in a large dimensional space, the points actually are close to each other, even if you drop one of the dimensions. So other information will actually reveal the race because they're correlated. And therefore, anonymization just doesn't work. So people are actually trying other mechanisms. And one of the mechanisms for protecting privacy is known as data synthesis. To put it very simply is, suppose you have a data set which has a lot of sensitive information. What you do is you understand some of the statistical properties of this data set. And in certain sense, you build the distributions and resample the distributions to create an equivalent data set which has the same properties as this data set, but there is no one-to-one correspondence between these two. And then you can train your machine learning model on this synthesized data. And this is, you're going to increasingly hear about this. This is an emerging technique. And in fact, in our center, we have Professor Xiao Ke, who's an expert in that, and Professor Reza Shokri. The reason you're going to hear more about it is the United States it does its census every 10 years. So there's going to be a census in the year 2020. And after doing the census, they actually don't release much of the data. They release data in a very aggregated form because of the privacy concern, because you can work backwards and then try to infer about individuals. And as a result, there is this very costly exercise of collecting very detailed data, which is used by the government for policy consideration, but it is not shared for the private sector. And they cannot actually extract value from the census data. So for the first time ever, the US 2020 census data, they're going to release much more granular data using data synthesis under differential privacy. So this technique, in my opinion, is something which I think people working in this area has to be aware of and be look out for. And if you really want expertise on this, I can actually recommend a colleague in US.
Thank you. We had one more question. We have time for one more question.
Hi. Just to follow up on, I think, the last, is this even working? Yeah. So my question is this. So when you talk about biases of outcomes rather than just statistical bias, how exactly would you actually try to capture the norms with respects to things like that? So I'll give you a specific example. So for example, if we talk about race, we can go CMIO, Chinese, Indian, Muslim, Malay, or others. Or we can break down the others, or we can talk about, maybe you're from Java and things like that. So there are lots of granulation, or even, for example, gender. You can have binary male, female. You can also have non-binary genders. A lot of this basically is connected to the norms of society as of now. So how do you kind of have that flow back into models in some sense?
To be honest, I have no idea, but so you are saying how the culture and sees your modeling and things like that. Okay, so first I should say on the biases. So to answer your data biases, your data scientists are probably not going to help you, if I'm brutally honest. Who is going to help you in that are the business guys. Because the guys who understand how the data was generated, they understand the biases. Your data science guys, they are just taking that as given and then do modeling based on that. So in that sense, they have only, many times, not always, they have just, for instance, one objective is to predict as well as possible. That's their, they have prediction problem, for instance, what is the, competitor's price, next week. They try to do that as well as possible. That's their objective. I'm talking about data scientist. In order to understand the, your data biases, you really have to understand how that data was generated. And that's a business guys knows that, not your data scientist. Sorry guys, business guys like you have to be involved. You cannot outsource that. So so what is the data bias? So then that depends on your, your business. So for instance, let's think about that we discussed shortly on loan applications. So, if there is a missing data on earnings, so because you have loan application, the people have to report their earnings. If someone is not reporting their earnings, if you give that to data science guys, what do we do typically? We have many methods to fill in the blanks, missing data, but implicitly all these models are thinking that the data is missing by random. By randomness, someone did not disclose the the income. If you think about the that decision, really, most likely it's not by randomness. The missing earnings income data is probably because this person don't have income or it's so low. It's a red flag. Okay, so then you have to start thinking that okay, we have to start using this as a one coverage in your forecast. Same applies to biased data sets. If you have insurance company, for instance, in insurance business, in order to understand that well, you have to understand two things. One is adverse selection. The other one is moral hazard. What is adverse selection? If I start selling you insurances, let's say, health insurance, 10,000, per month, most of you guys are saying that, way too expensive, but I will get some customers. Who do you think is coming in? Those customers that are really, really sick. So then if I do first machine learning, model based on this sample and forecast, what is the medical claims for this sample before I do the pricing decision, guess what? My business is gone, next month, because I'm not getting you all. I will only get the worst of you that are spending, they have really serious issues, and then they will spend, more than 10,000 per month. There you have, really, insurance business is fantastic, in order to understand finance, the innovation in finance, I think one of the best examples is to look history of insurances. How did they solve this moral hazard problem? So for instance, there is co-payments nowadays and etc. So how do you really do risk management on that? So that did not answer your culture, thing. So I said when I started, I have no idea.
I think he answered it when he had a slide on Sweden versus Finland.
In Finland, you can make jokes on, Swedes. That's like, our culture. So. Okay.
But on that note, folks, I'm sorry, but I do have to call the panel to a close. The panelists, are you around for a couple of minutes after this for a discussion? So they are going to be around, and they are held captive. Like I mentioned, there's only one door, which is the exit. So feel free to grab them. But on that note, I just want to say thank you so much. That was a very, very interesting presentations, but as well as panel. So Dr. Bora, Prof. Jussi, Prof. Mohan, thank you so much. Can we give them a big hand?